Dad, I think it's time you stop pretending you belong here. Her words cut sharper than the icy wind outside. It was Christmas Eve, and the living room glowed with warm lights, gold and red ornaments twinkling on a 12-foot tree, the smell of cinnamon candles drifting through the air. Laughter spilled from the dining room where my grandchildren were playing, their joy colliding with the silence that had suddenly wrapped itself around me. I stared at the small envelope in my hands. My daughter Sarah had pressed it into my palm like a gift, her eyes unreadable. I had expected a card, maybe a note of gratitude, something that carried the weight of family. Instead, the edges of the paper felt cold, foreign. "Open it," she insisted, her voice carrying that sharpness she used to reserve for arguments in her teenage years. Only now, it wasn't rebellion, it was calculation. My fingers trembled as I slid the flap open. The paper inside was crisp, freshly printed. One look, and the air in my lungs turned heavy. A retirement home brochure. The glossy picture on the front showed smiling seniors playing cards in a sunlit lounge. The words Bright Horizons Assisted Living mocked me in cheerful font. Beneath it, in Sarah's handwriting, a short message. "Dad, this is best for everyone. Please don't make this harder." The room around me blurred. The fireplace crackled, but its warmth didn't reach me. I could still hear the faint clinking of glasses from the kitchen, where her husband Mark poured himself another drink, pretending not to notice the ambush taking place in his own living room. My daughter's eyes softened, but not with love, with pity. "Dad, you forget things. You left the stove on last week. Mark and we've talked, and we can't keep worrying you'll burn the house down." Her words echoed against every sacrifice I had ever made. The mortgage payments I'd covered when Mark was out of work. The tuition I had worked double shifts to pay for. The countless holidays I'd carried alone after her mother passed, just to make sure Sarah still had joy. And now, on Christmas Eve, my gift was exile. I folded the brochure carefully, slipping it back into the envelope, my hands steadier than I felt. The weight of betrayal pressed heavier than the winter snow outside. For a moment I looked at the ornaments on the tree, the very same decorations Sarah had begged me to buy when she was 8 years old. I'd driven through a snowstorm to get them, because she said Christmas wouldn't feel right without golden stars. Now, under those same golden stars, my daughter was telling me my place was no longer with family, but in a room with strangers. I stood up slowly, the envelope still in my hand. What they didn't know was that the man they thought they were discarding had already been planning something of his own. I didn't storm out that night. Not yet. I sat back down in the armchair by the window, the same one I had bought for Sarah when she first moved into this house. The leather creaked beneath me as though it, too, was tired of carrying my weight. My daughter thought I was weak, a burden, but sitting there staring at the envelope in my hand, I realized I had been blind to her for far too long. The house smelled of roasted turkey and pine needles, a perfect holiday postcard, but underneath the sweetness lingered something bitter, like betrayal simmering in the air. I glanced at the mantel above the fireplace. Framed photographs lined it, but my face was almost invisible among them. There was Sarah's wedding photo, all smiles and promises. I remembered that day vividly, how I had covered the shortfall when Mark's family couldn't afford their half of the reception costs, $25,000, every penny from my savings account. That smile she wore in the photo had been paid for by me. Beside it, a picture of their first home. This home standing proudly against the suburban backdrop. The down payment had come from my retirement fund, $80,000. Mark had shaken my hand and called me the most generous father-in-law alive. At the time, I had believed him. I looked back at the envelope. Generosity had become expectation. Love had become obligation. And now, obligation had become eviction. The living room door opened, and my grandson Matthew came running in, a toy car clutched in his little fist. "Grandpa, look," he said, his face lighting up as he zoomed it across the carpet. For a moment, the weight on my chest lifted. I knelt down, forcing a smile. "That's a fine car, Matthew, fast as lightning," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He laughed and ran back toward the dining room, his laughter trailing behind him like bells on a sleigh. Sarah stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching me. Her expression was tight, cautious. "Dad," she began softly, "don't make this harder. We've thought about this for months. You'll be happier with people your own age." Happier. My own daughter believed happiness meant stripping me of everything I had built, this house, this family, this life. Her words dragged me back to darker times. I remembered standing in the freezing cold 25 years earlier, mixing cement by hand because we couldn't afford contractors. My fingers had bled, my back had screamed, but I kept going. because Sarah deserved a roof over her head, because family mattered more than pain. I remembered the nights after her mother died, when Sarah would cry herself to sleep. I would sit by her bed for hours, whispering stories about angels watching over us, even though I barely believed them myself. I worked through exhaustion and grief, holding everything together with nothing but stubbornness and love. And now my daughter repaid that sacrifice with an envelope. The grandfather clock chimed, its solemn toll echoing through the room. It had been her mother's wedding gift to me, a reminder that time was precious. Sarah didn't even glance at it anymore. To her, it was just old wood taking up space. Mark's voice drifted in from the kitchen. "Did you give it to him?" His tone was casual, careless. "Yes," Sarah replied, not realizing I could hear. "He'll understand. He has to." The fire popped in the hearth, throwing sparks like tiny bursts of anger. I clenched the envelope tighter, my knuckles white. They thought I would understand. They thought I would quietly accept exile. But they had forgotten who built this life. I leaned back in the chair, letting the glow of the Christmas lights wash over me. Every ornament on that tree told a story of my labor, my sacrifices, my love. And if Sarah had forgotten that story, then it was time I reminded her. The man sitting silently by the fire was not a burden, he was a father, a builder. And soon he would be something else entirely. Someone with a plan. The breaking point came not in the living room, but later that night. Dinner was over. The plates were cleared. Laughter had faded into the background hum of the television. I sat quietly at the edge of the sofa, watching Mark pour himself another glass of wine. His tie was loosened, his cheeks flushed with arrogance. "Sarah," he said, swirling the glass like he was some king in his castle, "once your dad moves out, we'll finally be able to remodel the basement. Maybe a gym or a wine cellar. What do you think?" The words dropped like stones in my chest. Remodel the basement? My home? My sweat, my money, my sacrifices, reduced to square footage for his convenience. Sarah leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. "It'll be nice to have the space, and honestly, Dad will be better off. Bright Horizons has an activity calendar. Bingo, movie nights, outings, he'll make friends." They laughed together, laughed as if my exile was already decided. I sat frozen, staring at the firelight reflecting off my glass of water. My hand trembled, not from age, but from rage, carefully masked as stillness. They thought I wasn't listening. They thought I was fading, irrelevant, but every word lodged inside me like nails in a coffin. I remembered another Christmas Eve, 30 years earlier. Sarah had been 6 years old, tugging at my sleeve, begging for the dollhouse she'd seen in a magazine. We couldn't afford it then, but I had worked nights in the freezing garage, crafting one from scraps of wood. I painted it by hand, added little curtains, even built miniature furniture. When she saw it, her eyes had lit up brighter than any Christmas tree. That was love. That was sacrifice. And now, that same little girl, my little girl, sat across the room, planning to discard me like a worn-out ornament. The television droned on, a holiday special filling the silence between their laughter. I set my glass down carefully, almost reverently, on the coffee table I had built for them years ago. My reflection stared back at me in its polished surface. That was the moment something shifted inside me. No more nodding, no more silent endurance, no more pretending gratitude for scraps of affection. I stood, my movement sudden enough that Sarah looked up. "Dad?" she asked, her tone sharp with suspicion. I held the envelope in my hand. The paper now creased from my grip. "I want to thank you," I said quietly. My voice carried a calmness that even surprised me. "For what?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. "For reminding me who I am," I replied. I slipped the envelope into my coat pocket and turned toward the door. The sound of the grandfather clock marked each step I took. "Dad, wait," Sarah called, her voice tinged with unease. But I didn't wait. I opened the door, letting the cold night air rush inside, carrying with it the sharp scent of pine and the distant echo of church bells ringing midnight. Behind me, the warmth of the house glowed like a cage I was finally escaping. Out there, in the frozen night, a new plan was waiting. And it began now. The night air cut through my coat as I stepped onto the porch. My breath rose in white clouds against the black sky. Christmas lights blinked from the neighboring houses, each one a picture of warmth and belonging. I stood in the snow, the envelope heavy in my pocket, and for the first time in years, I felt completely alone. The crunch of my boots echoed down the driveway. I should have kept walking. I should have climbed into my car and left without looking back. But halfway there, I stopped. My reflection glimmered faintly in the frosted car window, and I caught sight of myself, old, tired, forgotten. A question rose uninvited. What if they're right? I pressed my palm against the cold glass, my breath fogging it with doubt. Maybe I was too much to handle. Maybe my memory lapses. The times I left the stove on or misplaced my keys were warning signs. Maybe Bright Horizons was where I belonged, sitting in a room full of strangers, trading stories about better days, waiting for the end. The thought wrapped around me like the cold, numbing convincing. For a moment, my chest tightened with something dangerously close to surrender. Then, like a spark in the dark, another memory surfaced. Maria, my late wife. I saw her face the night before she passed, pale but resolute, as she held my hand. Don't let them take away your dignity, she whispered. Her grip was weak, but her words were carved in stone. You built this family. You earned your place. Promise me you'll never let anyone erase that. I had promised. And standing there in the snow, I realized surrender would mean breaking that promise. I pulled the envelope from my pocket and stared at the cheerful brochure, its glossy cover mocking me with staged smiles. Best for everyone, Sarah had written. I almost laughed. Best for them, not for me. For them, it meant space, money, freedom. For me, it meant disappearing quietly so their lives could expand without guilt. I tore the brochure in half, then into quarters, until the pieces fluttered like confetti onto the snow. The wind carried them across the yard, scattering their false promises into the darkness. I wasn't going to disappear. But even as resolve surged back into me, a flicker of doubt lingered. Could I really fight back? Could one old man outwit his own daughter and her smug husband? The answer came as I slid into the driver's seat of my car. The leather was cracked, the heater slow, but the engine roared to life with the determination I felt pulsing through my veins. Yes, I could fight back. Not with fists, not with anger, but with something far more dangerous. With intelligence. And with patience. The storm of betrayal had thrown me down, but I wasn't broken. Not yet. This was only the beginning. I sat in the car, the faint hum of the engine filling the silence. My hands gripped the steering wheel, not with fear anymore, but with focus. Out there, under the frozen night sky, I knew one thing for certain. This story wasn't over. And now I want to ask you something. What would you have done if your own child handed you an envelope like that on Christmas Eve? Would you have walked away quietly, or would you have stayed and fought for your dignity? Tell me in the comments. Because this betrayal was only the spark. The fire had yet to burn. The roads were quiet that night. Fresh snow blanketed the streets, muting every sound except the crunch of my tires. As I drove, my thoughts sharpened, no longer clouded by doubt. I wasn't just a discarded father. I was a man with decades of experience in building, saving, sacrificing. They thought age had dulled me, but all it had done was refine me. I pulled into my driveway, the porch light flickering like it always had. Inside, my house smelled faintly of cedar and old books. The photographs on the walls told the story of a family I had carried on my back. But as I walked through those familiar rooms, I no longer felt sorrow. I felt clarity. The envelope sat on my desk. Beside it, a drawer full of documents I hadn't opened in years. Mortgage papers, receipts, contracts, all the evidence of what I had given to Sarah and Mark. I spread them across the desk one by one, like a general laying out maps for battle. There was the $80,000 transfer for their down payment, the tuition checks I had written when Sarah insisted her children deserved private schooling, the endless bills I had covered, groceries, repairs, even Mark's car insurance when he claimed times were tight. Every page screamed the same truth. I had been the foundation of their comfort, and foundations, when removed, could bring down entire houses. I opened my safe and pulled out a folder labeled estate. Inside was the deed to their house, the one Sarah so proudly called her home. What she had forgotten, or perhaps never realized, was that the property wasn't entirely theirs. The loan had my name on it. My money had kept it alive. My signature had kept the bank at bay. I held that deed in my hand, the paper thick, official, and binding. Suddenly, I saw everything clearly. They had power over me only because I allowed it. They assumed my silence was weakness. But silence is not weakness. It's preparation. The grandfather clock struck midnight. Its solemn toll echoed through my empty home. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Sarah had once spread her homework, where I had once explained fractions with pennies and nickels. Now, that same table became my war room. I began making a list. Not of grievances, I already knew them by heart, but of actions. Direct, precise, undeniable. Cancel the automatic payments. No more quiet bleeding of my savings into their lives. Review the deed and consult my lawyer, Todd Fisher. Yes, I still had his card. He'd know exactly how to secure my position. Rewrite my will. Every dollar, every asset would go where it was truly valued, not to those who saw me as a burden. Prepare the reveal. Timing mattered. They had given me their betrayal on Christmas Eve. I would return the favor when it would hurt most. As I wrote, my hand no longer trembled. It was steady, deliberate. The fear I had felt earlier that evening was gone, replaced by a fire I hadn't known still lived inside me. I leaned back in my chair, the list complete. For years I had been the man who gave, who sacrificed, who endured. But now I would be the man who taught them the price of ingratitude. I walked to the window. Outside, the snow glowed under the street lamp, quiet and untouched. It felt like a blank page, waiting for the story I was about to write. Sarah thought she had closed a chapter in my life, but what she didn't know was that she had opened a new one, and this time I would hold the pen. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The house was still, the air crisp with winter silence. For the first time in months, I didn't feel weighed down. I felt alive. Purpose has a way of turning even old bones into steel. I brewed a pot of strong coffee, the bitter aroma filling the kitchen. Sitting at the table, I laid out my list again. Today wasn't about plans. Today was about action. I started with the bank. The young man on the other end of the phone spoke cheerfully, unaware he was about to help me cut off the lifeline Sarah and Mark had been drinking from for years. Yes, Mr. Hayes, I see the automatic transfers for the mortgage payments. He confirmed, typing rapidly. I want them stopped, effective immediately, I said, my voice calm, almost too calm. A pause. Sir, are you sure? These payments have been active for 5 years, I finished for him. And they end today. The click of the keyboard sounded like liberation. When he gave me the confirmation number, I wrote it down with steady hands, one chain broken. Next was insurance. For years, both their cars had been bundled under my policy, the payments silently draining from my account. I called the company. Remove both vehicles, I said. They'll handle their own coverage now. The agent hesitated, then complied. Another chain broken. By noon, I had spent 3 hours on the phone, dismantling the invisible web I had spun around them, a web they mistook for security, but was in truth my generosity. Each call was like turning a key in a lock, freeing me from the prison of obligation. When I closed my laptop, the silence in the room felt different, not hollow, not lonely, powerful. But this was only the beginning. I pulled out the folder with the house deed. The weight of it in my hands was almost satisfying. I remembered every nail I'd hammered, every dollar I'd poured into making that place their dream home. But the truth was undeniable. The foundation was mine. Without me, their dream would crumble. I dialed a familiar number. Fisher and Associates, how may I help you? A receptionist answered. This is Roy Hayes. Tell Todd Fisher I'm ready to talk about my estate. By afternoon, I was sitting across from Todd in his modest office, a stack of papers between us. He listened as I explained everything, the envelope, the betrayal, the years of financial bleeding. His expression never changed, but his pen moved quickly. They think you're powerless, he said finally, looking up. But legally, you hold every card. We'll make sure they know it. I left the office with a folder under my arm and a new fire in my chest. The first step of my revenge wasn't anger. It was knowledge. And now I had both. Driving home, the snow had stopped, leaving the world blanketed in quiet white. It felt symbolic, as if life itself was daring me to rewrite the story on its clean slate. Back in my house, I poured myself a glass of whiskey, the good one I'd been saving since Maria passed. I raised it to her photograph on the mantel. They thought they could erase me, I whispered, but they're about to learn who built the ground they walk on. The fire in the hearth crackled, warm and steady, and in its glow I realized something important. Revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about justice, about balance. And Christmas had always been about giving. This year, I was going to give my daughter and her husband the one gift they never expected. Consequences. The day after Christmas, I drove back to Sarah's house. The streets were lined with snow, the kind that muffled everything into silence. I parked across the street and sat there for a moment, watching the warm glow of their living room. Inside, I could see the faint silhouettes of my grandchildren playing, their laughter faintly audible when the front door opened and shut. I wasn't there to see them, not this time. I stepped out of the car, my boots crunching against the frozen pavement, and pulled my coat tighter. In my pocket, I carried not an envelope, but a letter signed, notarized, and irreversible. When Sarah opened the door, her smile flickered. "Dad, I didn't expect you." I held up my hand. "Don't pretend, Sarah. I'm not here for pleasantries." I handed her the folded document. "Read it." Her brow furrowed as she unfolded the papers. Mark appeared behind her, his arm draped casually over her shoulder, that smug grin plastered on his face. But as Sarah's eyes scanned the words, her expression drained of color. What is this?" she stammered. "It's the cancellation of every payment I've made on this house. Effective immediately," I said, my voice steady. "From now on, the mortgage, the insurance, the bills, they're yours, all yours." Mark snatched the papers from her hand, scanning them with growing panic. "You can't do this. We'll lose the house." I met his gaze, unflinching. "I built this life for you, and you tried to throw me away like garbage." "Well, here's the truth, Mark. You don't stand on your own. You never have. And now you'll learn what it feels like." Sarah's lips trembled. "Dad, you can't just—" "I can," I interrupted sharply. "And I did. The bank will be calling you next week. And when they do, remember this moment." The silence that followed was heavier than any snowfall. My daughter's eyes filled with tears, not of regret, but of fear. Mark's bravado faltered, his face paling as the weight of reality pressed down. I stepped back onto the porch, the winter air sharp against my skin. "Merry Christmas," I said softly, the words cutting like glass. This year, I finally gave myself a gift. Freedom. And then I turned and walked away. As I slid back into my car, my heart pounded. Not from doubt, not from fear, but from the irrevocable knowledge that I had crossed the line. There was no going back. The man they thought was weak, dependent, disposable, was gone. In his place stood someone far more dangerous. Someone with nothing left to lose. 2 days passed before the phone rang. I recognized Sarah's number, but for a moment I let it buzz on the table, the sound sharp against the quiet of my house. Finally I answered. "Dad?" Her voice was soft, trembling. Not sharp, not commanding. Vulnerable. "Yes," I said flatly. I've been thinking. Maybe we handled things wrong. Maybe I said things I shouldn't have. Can we talk?" For a second, a warmth stirred in me, the sound of her broken tone, the cracks in her voice. It pulled at the father in me, the one who had always rushed to fix, to forgive. I thought of her as a little girl again, tugging at my sleeve, begging me to help fix her broken toys. "Talk," I said. She hesitated. "Mark's under a lot of stress. The mortgage, the insurance, it's a lot. We didn't realize how much you were doing for us. Maybe we can find a way to work this out. Maybe you can come back for dinner. Just to talk things through." Dinner. The word twisted something in me. Was it an olive branch, or just another lure to pull me back into the cage I had finally escaped? I thought of Maria again, her last words, her plea that I never let anyone strip away my dignity. Don't let them take advantage of you. "I'll think about it," I said carefully. That evening, Sarah showed up at my door. She stood on the porch in her heavy coat, eyes red from crying. "Dad, please," she whispered when I opened the door. "We're still family. I don't want to lose you." For the first time in years, I saw the child I had raised, the girl who once believed her father could fix anything. And for a moment, I wanted to believe her. We sat in my kitchen, mugs of coffee steaming between us. She talked about her children, about Christmas morning, about how they'd missed me. Her words dripped with regret, with longing, with just enough sincerity to almost make me forget the sting of that envelope. Almost. "Dad," she said finally, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Mark and I, we were wrong. We should never have said those things. We just panicked. But we can do better. If you could help us for a little longer, just until we get back on our feet, we'll make it right. I promise." There it was, the hook hidden in her words, the plea dressed as reconciliation. And for a fleeting second, I considered it. The house felt warmer with her in it. The sound of her voice, even tainted by guilt, carried echoes of the daughter I once knew. But deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't change, it was desperation. Still, I let her leave that night with a hug, her tears dampening my shoulder. I let her think she had softened me, that maybe, just maybe, I would return to the role of savior. Because sometimes the cruelest justice is letting them believe they still have a chance, right before showing them they don't. A week later, I got a call. Not from Sarah, but from my lawyer, Todd Fisher. Mr. Hayes, he said, his tone brisk but tinged with something unusual concern. You should probably sit down for this. My grip tightened on the phone. What is it? Your daughter and her husband have been in contact with another attorney. They're trying to have you declared incompetent. The words struck harder than any betrayal yet. Incompetent. As if I were some broken old man, incapable of handling my own affairs. My chest burned with fury. They filed preliminary papers, Todd continued. They claim you've shown signs of memory loss, poor judgment, and unsafe behavior. If they succeed, they'll gain guardianship over you and over your estate. For a moment the room spun. My daughter's tears, her soft apologies at my kitchen table. They hadn't been reconciliation. They had been reconnaissance. I slammed my fist against the desk, the sound echoing through the house. She hugged me, I whispered, rage building like fire in my throat. She looked me in the eye and promised me we were still family. And all the while, she was preparing to take everything, Todd finished grimly. My mind raced. If they declared me incompetent, every move I had made, canceling the payments, securing the deed, rewriting my will, could be undone. Worse, I would become exactly what they wanted, powerless. Don't panic, Todd said. They'll need evidence. Medical records, testimony. Do you have a doctor who can vouch for your health? Yes, I said, my voice steadying. And more than that, I have proof. Years of documents, every bill I paid, every decision I made, every sacrifice. That night, I sat at my desk until dawn, pulling out files, receipts, letters. My dining room table transformed into a fortress of paper, each page a testament to my clarity, my responsibility, my competence. But as I worked, something else hardened in me. This wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. It was about teaching Sarah the lesson she had never learned. Family is not a bank, and betrayal always has a price. The next day, I walked into Todd's office, carrying 2 boxes of evidence. He looked at me, surprised at my energy. Mr. Hayes, you've done more preparation than half my clients under 50. Good, I said, because if my daughter wants a war, she's about to find out I know how to fight one. That evening, Sarah called again. Her voice was syrupy sweet. Dad, I was thinking maybe you could come over for Sunday dinner. The kids miss you. I smiled into the receiver, though she couldn't see it. I'll think about it, I said. My tone was calm, measured. Because now, I wasn't the one walking into their trap. They were walking into mine. They thought they could outsmart me. They thought an old man wouldn't see through the lies, the hugs, the fake apologies. But now the game had changed. And I want to ask you, if your own child tried to have you declared incompetent just to steal your home, your savings, your dignity, what would you do? Would you fight back with everything you had left, or would you walk away and let them win? Let me know in the comments, because the storm is only beginning, and when the truth finally comes out, it won't just break them, it will bury them. The hearing was set for a Thursday morning. I arrived at the courthouse wearing my best charcoal suit, the one Maria had chosen years ago for our anniversary dinner. The air inside was sterile, cold, marble floors echoing every step, the faint smell of old paper and coffee lingering in the halls. Sarah and Mark were already there, seated with their attorney. Sarah's hair was pulled into a severe bun, her eyes avoiding mine. Mark looked smug, as though victory was already theirs. When I entered, Sarah finally looked up. For a moment, her face faltered, but then she forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Dad, she said softly, as if we were at a family reunion instead of a courtroom. Sarah, I replied, my voice calm even. The judge entered, calling the session to order. Their attorney began with a speech that dripped with false concern. Your Honor, my clients are only acting out of love and responsibility. Mr. Hayes has shown repeated lapses in judgment, forgetting to turn off the stove, misplacing important documents, struggling with daily tasks. For his safety and the safety of others, guardianship is necessary. Sarah nodded along, her lips pressed tight, playing the role of the dutiful daughter. My blood boiled, but I stayed silent. When the attorney finished, the judge turned to me. Mr. Hayes, do you have representation? I rose slowly, letting the silence hang heavy. Yes, Your Honor. Todd Fisher, my attorney, will speak on my behalf. Todd stood, his voice steady, professional. Your Honor, what my client has shown is not incompetence. What he has shown is generosity, a generosity that has been exploited. Today, we will demonstrate not only his competence, but the calculated manipulation of those who claim to act in his best interest. He motioned to the boxes beside our table. I had spent nights filling them, organizing every receipt, every statement. Todd pulled out document after document. Exhibit A, he said, holding up bank records. Regular, consistent mortgage payments made by Mr. Hayes for the past 5 years. Payments not for his home, but for theirs. Does this look like incompetence or responsibility? Mark shifted uncomfortably. Sarah's face drained of color. Exhibit B, Todd continued. Insurance policies, utility bills, tuition payments, all handled by Mr. Hayes. Every account meticulously managed. If anything, he has carried their responsibilities, not neglected his own. The courtroom murmured. Todd then played the recording I had captured weeks earlier. Sarah and Mark whispering about my deterioration, laughing about how they'd sell the house once I was gone. Their voices filled the chamber like poison. Sarah's eyes widened in horror. Mark's jaw tightened, his confidence cracking. Your Honor, Todd said, his tone sharp now. This is not concern. This is conspiracy. They are not protecting him. They are preying on him. The judge leaned back, eyebrows raised, the weight of the evidence sinking in. And in that moment, I felt the tide turning. For the first time, their lies were not whispered in kitchens or written in envelopes. They were exposed under the cold light of truth, in front of strangers who could see them for what they truly were. And it was only the beginning. The courtroom was silent, except for the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights above. Sarah sat frozen, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Mark's face was red, his jaw clenched as if he could grind his way out of the mess. The recording still echoed in my mind. It's time for a nursing home. The house is worth almost $1 million. Words they had spoken so casually, now immortalized for all to hear. The judge leaned forward, his gavel resting loosely in his hand. Mr. and Mrs. Walters, he said, his voice steady but sharp. Do you have a response to these recordings? Mark cleared his throat, trying to summon his usual arrogance. Your Honor, those were private conversations taken out of context. We were worried? Todd cut in, his voice like a blade. You laughed about selling his house. You mocked his trust in you. That is not worry. That is greed. The judge raised his hand, silencing the room. His eyes locked on Sarah. Ms. Walters? For a moment she looked at me. Really looked at me. Her lips trembled. I saw the battle in her eyes, shame fighting against pride. Finally she whispered, We thought it was best. The judge exhaled slowly. Best for whom? The weight of his words filled the chamber. Todd placed one final document on the judge's desk. The newly drafted will, signed and witnessed, removing Sarah and Mark from any inheritance. Your Honor, my client is of sound mind. He has made clear, deliberate decisions about his estate, decisions that reflect his independence and his awareness of those around him. The judge scanned the papers, then looked at me. Mr. Hayes, do you believe yourself capable of managing your own affairs? I stood, my legs steady, my voice firm. Your Honor, I have been managing not only my affairs but theirs. I built their life with my hands and my sacrifice, and I will not be discarded like an old coat, because it no longer fits their plans. I am not incompetent. I am their father, and I will not let them erase me. The silence that followed was absolute. Then the judge nodded. Petition denied. Case dismissed. The gavel struck, final and unforgiving. Sarah's face crumpled. Tears spilled down her cheeks. But they weren't the tears of a daughter who realized her mistake. They were the tears of someone watching power slip through her fingers. Mark muttered curses under his breath. His mask of control shattered. I gathered my papers slowly, deliberately, while they sat in defeat. As I walked past, I leaned close enough for them to hear. You tried to bury me, I whispered, but you forgot. I'm the one who taught you how to dig. Their faces burned with shame as I walked out of that courtroom, the cold winter air greeting me like an ally. Justice had not just been served, it had been witnessed. And there was no going back for them now. When I stepped out of the courthouse, the winter sun broke through the clouds, scattering light across the snow-covered streets. For the first time in years, I felt lighter, like the invisible weight I had carried for decades had finally slipped from my shoulders. Todd walked beside me, his leather briefcase in hand. Mr. Hayes, he said, glancing at me with a rare smile, I think you just taught your daughter and son-in-law a lesson they'll never forget. I didn't do it for a lesson, I replied, pulling my coat tighter against the cold. I did it for dignity, mine and Maria's. We shook hands, and I watched him leave, his figure disappearing into the flow of city life. Then I stood for a long moment on the courthouse steps, breathing in the crisp air, letting it fill every part of me. When I returned home, the house felt different, not because it had changed, but because I had. I no longer walked its rooms as a man waiting for his life to be taken away. I walked as a man who had taken it back. The following day, Sarah came to my door. She didn't knock loudly. She stood there, small, her eyes swollen from crying. For a moment, I almost didn't open it, but something inside me needed to hear what she had to say. "Dad," she whispered when I finally cracked the door. I don't know what to say." I studied her face, the same face that once lit up when she opened a wooden dollhouse I'd built with my own hands. For a moment, my heart ached, but then I remembered the envelope, the laughter in her kitchen, the petition she had filed with cold precision. "You don't need to say anything," I told her, my voice calm, steady. "I've heard enough." Tears rolled down her cheeks. I thought, maybe— "No, Sarah," I interrupted. "You thought of yourself. You thought of Mark. You thought of the house, the money, the freedom you'd have if I disappeared. But you never thought of me. And now I need you to live with what you've done." Her lip trembled. For once she had no argument, no defense. She turned and walked back to her car, her shoulders hunched against the cold. I watched her drive away, not with anger, but with something far stronger, resolve. Inside, I poured myself another glass of whiskey, raising it once more to Maria's photograph on the mantel. "We did it," I whispered. "They won't erase me. Not now. Not ever." That night, the grandfather clock chimed as I sat by the fire. Its steady rhythm no longer sounded like time slipping away. It sounded like a heartbeat, steady and strong. I wasn't a burden. I wasn't fading. I was alive. And I had proven that even when those closest to you turn their backs, there is still strength in standing tall. Sarah had tried to give me an ending, but instead I had written my own. Weeks passed after the court hearing, and the winter began to thaw. The snow on the rooftops melted into rivulets that trickled down the gutters, and with each drop I felt something inside me loosening as well. The bitterness, the anger. It didn't vanish, but it settled into something calmer, something stronger. My days found a new rhythm, no more calls from the bank on Sarah's behalf, no more late-night worries about whether they'd survive without me. Their survival was no longer my responsibility. For the first time in decades, I began living my life. Mornings I walked to the park with a thermos of coffee, the air crisp, birdsong returning slowly as spring nudged winter aside. Children played on the swings, their laughter reminding me of simpler times with Sarah, before greed and entitlement poisoned her heart. And though the memories sometimes stung, they also reminded me of who I was. A father, yes, but also a man still capable of joy. One afternoon, I wandered into a woodworking shop on Main Street. The smell of sawdust and varnish hit me like a wave of nostalgia. I hadn't built anything since Maria died, my tools left to gather dust in the garage. But standing there, running my hands across smooth oak and sturdy maple, something stirred. Creation. Purpose. I bought a small kit of tools, just enough to get started. That evening, I set up my old workbench, the air filling with the comforting hum of sandpaper against wood. My hands, though older and lined with age, remembered every movement. Slowly, a small birdhouse began to take shape. When it was done, I hung it in the backyard, watching as the first curious sparrow fluttered inside. It was simple, but it was mine. Word spread in the neighborhood. A week later, a neighbor stopped by, asking if I could repair an old chair. Then another asked for a shelf. Before long, my garage buzzed with life again. Wood shavings on the floor, the smell of pine, the sound of laughter as neighbors dropped by to chat while I worked. I wasn't just filling time, I was building again. And with every project, I felt Maria close. She had always loved the smell of fresh wood, the way my creations brought warmth into our home. Now, in the quiet hum of my workshop, I could almost hear her voice. "You're still you, Roy. You're still strong." As for Sarah, she tried calling a few times. Each voicemail was the same, a mix of apologies and excuses. I didn't answer, not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation. Some betrayals carved too deep to heal with words. Maybe one day she'll understand what she lost. Maybe she won't. That's her burden to carry now, not mine. Mark? He never reached out. Last I heard, through the grapevine, the bank was already breathing down their necks. Without my support, their dream home had become a liability. Perhaps that was justice in its purest form, not my revenge, but the natural consequence of their choices. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, I sat on my porch with a glass of wine. The birdhouse swayed gently in the breeze, the sparrows darting in and out with carefree energy. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't haunted by what I'd lost. I was grateful for what I still had. Freedom, dignity, purpose. Maria had been right. Dignity is not given, it's guarded, and I had finally guarded mine. I leaned back in my chair, the cool evening air brushing against my skin, and let a smile spread across my face. The world hadn't ended when Sarah handed me that envelope on Christmas Eve. In fact, that night had been the beginning of something new. Not the end of my story, the rebirth of it. Looking back, I realized that betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. It can come from the very people you sacrificed everything for. But dignity is something no one can take from you unless you hand it over willingly. That Christmas Eve, my daughter thought she was ending my story. Instead, she gave me the spark to begin a new one. One built not on obligation or sacrifice, but on freedom and self-respect. And now I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my place? Would you have forgiven, or would you have taken justice into your own hands? Tell me in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this, stories of betrayal, justice, and transformation, don't forget to subscribe. Because sometimes, the sweetest revenge is survival.